You're listening to The Luxury Item, the podcast on the business of luxury and the people and companies that are shaping the future of the luxury industry. Here's your host, Scott Kerr.
According to a recent joint report by Bain and Tmall, the luxury goods market in mainland China likely achieved 48% growth in 2020, doubling China's overall share of the global luxury market, with further growth expected in 2025. Much of that growth fueled largely by China's affluent middle class, millennials and Gen Z, and female consumers. The modern Chinese woman is an economic powerhouse who stands at the forefront of global luxury spending. With more financial and social independence, social stability, and higher disposable incomes, women in China are spending more on themselves, and luxury brands are raising the bar to satisfy their demands. For luxury Western brands looking to flourish in China, it is essential for them to speak to Chinese women in a way that resonates. That means embodying contemporary femininity and various gender expressions and responding to their values and aspirations. Here to help us better understand who the new generation of Chinese women are and how brands should think about representations of femininity and beauty in their marketing in China is my guest today on The Luxury Item, Laurence Lim Dally. Laurence is the founder and managing director of Cherry Blossoms Intercultural Branding, a boutique marketing agency based in Hong Kong and New York City. She is an expert on diversity and decoding of cultural differences. With her Cherry Blossoms team, she helps Western brands in the beauty, hospitality, jewelry, fashion, and wine and spirit sectors to better resonate with Asian consumers. Originally from France, Laurence started her career working for the French government on diversity and equal opportunity issues before moving to Hong Kong in 2008. There she found her marketing agency Cherry Blossoms, with the goal of bridging the gap between East and West. Since 2018, Laurence has been based in New York City and is now a frequent keynote speaker on China and marketing for organizations such as China Connect, the Women in Innovation Forum, the French Chamber of Commerce, Sotheby's, Jing Daily, and major international business schools. Welcome to The Luxury Item, Laurence.
Thank you for your invitation, Scott.
I'm so excited to have you on.
Me too.
It's been a long time coming. I think we've been talking about it for a while, but I'm so glad you're able to join me today.
So am I.
Can you tell us a little bit about Cherry Blossoms Agency and how you work with brands?
Sure. So Cherry Blossoms is an agency that I created back in 2009 in Hong Kong. And the idea was to help luxury brands and luxury groups decode cultural differences between the West and China in terms of mindset, in terms of imagination, aesthetics, language, values, to help them localize their branding. So basically, it's about helping brands improve their cultural intelligence to avoid cultural bias and to better resonate with Chinese consumers.
So when you launched it, did you see a gap in the market? Like what motivated you to focus specifically on that?
I think at the time, more than 10 years ago, there was a clear China was already a major market for the luxury industry, but there was a gap because there was a vast ignorance of Chinese consumers and of these cultural differences. So there was I wouldn't say a blue ocean, but there was definitely a gap to fill in. Yeah, because I had learned before, from my background, I was working for 5 years on diversity issue, cultural diversity, and I also studied semiotics. So I thought it was a good way to combine the cultural decoding to this key market that was China, and to go beyond market research, because there has always been a lot of market research institute in China and analyzing the consumer behaviors, etc. But I wanted to go deeper than this and really deconstruct these cultural differences at a more with more granularity. I think that was something that was missing at the time.
You know, it seems the biggest challenge for Western brands is that they're still struggling to master the basics of being successful in China. Why can't Western luxury brands connect with Chinese consumers?
Cannot connect? I would say they connect. I think they connect more and more. Precisely. I think that 10 years ago, they didn't connect because luxury brands, and especially European luxury brands, were perceived positively and were erratic and aspirational because they were Western brands. So I have the feeling that luxury brands didn't really make the effort to engage with Chinese consumers. and they remained a little bit distant and very Western centric in their approach. And I think that now they do connect. I think now all eyes are in China because, as you said, China is contributes to 90% of the growth of the luxury industry today. So for most, for many luxury brands, China is their number one market. So they do connect. They localize a lot their communication. They use more and more local Chinese ambassadors, influencers. They design localized content on WeChat. They enter Chinese e-commerce platforms, which was just a few years ago something not likely to happen. Yeah, so they connect, but sorry, they connect more, but it doesn't mean they resonate more with Chinese consumers, and that's the challenge.
Right. And maybe that's what I was trying to say, because brands like Gucci and Louis Vuitton have been actually doing well there and get it, if you will. But you're still seeing in the last few years, even as recently the last few months, where you have luxury brands still making mistakes in their marketing efforts.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We observe more and more a growing number of backlashes and social media in China precisely because brands localize more and more their marketing and they make mistakes. And in a context of rising national pride, there's a hypersensitivity of the Chinese audience towards any form of ignorance or condescendence towards Chinese. So we see more and more mistakes from luxury brands, not only luxury brands, but in particular, yeah.
I'm wondering if are they not vetting it the right way before they launch the campaigns? Do they not have the right people on staff to look at these things before it hits the marketplace?
I think the luxury industry is an industry that remains very centralized. And sometimes there's not the right bridge between the local teams, the local agencies, and the headquarters. So they talk about disconnect here. But I would say in terms of, we all talk about the very caricatural mistakes of luxury brands like the Dolce & Gabbana, chopsticks, etc. But I think it's more the mistakes they make are more insidious. It's more and it's more about in general, I think the lack of representation of Asian people. I think this remains a major issue for luxury brands to have a more representative and more balanced representation of Asians and Caucasians when they communicate, when they address the China market.
You recently did a webinar for French founders about the new conceptions and representations of femininities and feminism in China and how Western brands can best engage with Chinese women. Is there a fundamental disconnect that you're seeing between the notions and standards of femininity and actual aspirations and values of younger women in China?
Absolutely. There's definitely a disconnect. Because the specificity of Chinese femininity is that it has been encoded very early in Chinese history by Chinese tradition. So at two levels. First, at a physical level, you have since the Han Dynasty, so 2 centuries before Christ, you have very specific and detailed beauty criteria, extremely centralized ideals of beauty, which were defined in poems, in literature, through very specific metaphors. And at psychological level, you have the heavy Confucian heritage about the inferiority of women, who's supposed to be soft, submissive, reserved, etc. And this has formatted femininities in China for centuries. So something very rigid about, even today, about the conceptions and representations of femininity. So of course, there are today screaming aspirations of younger women to shake, I don't say to break, but to shake these norms, these beauty standards, these social roles of the family, the social pressure, notably on marriage. There's a huge disconnect, and we see it's very interesting to have a closer look to women's representations in Chinese fiction, TV series and movies, because we see very rapidly that representations and aspirations are changing.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like the whole Western model of feminism is so new to China. How have the expectations of Chinese women and the dialogue around feminism, how has that changed over the years?
Well, I would say there is no there is no real dialogue on feminism in China because it's censored by the Chinese government.
Right.
So you don't have any more feminist movements. You have feminist activists in prison. Think of Me Too. The hashtag Me Too is censored in China. And there are topics, so important topics in China, like, for instance, domestic violence, which no one can talk about. So no, there's no dialogue around feminism. But
that must restrict marketers who want to come into the market. They have to be very careful about the message that they put in their advertising, so it doesn't cross that boundary of appearing to be feminist.
Absolutely, yeah. Which is why it's a very subtle game, because, and I feel like brands get a little bit imprisoned in very cheesy, empowering messages to invite women to be more independent and strong and determined, but we're going in a circle, and I think it's very difficult to go further these messages. But at the same time, we need to realize the gap between the feminist fights in the West, and the US in particular, and in China. China is definitely lagging behind. Whereas you see in Europe or in the US, feminism is about equal pay, toxic masculinity, the representation of women in politics. In China, it's much more basic than this. The feminist fight in China is about fighting for women's independence. So it's a core topic. It's still a core topic. It's about concretely the freedom to study, the freedom not to get married at 25 and to focus on your career. So it's about that. So maybe I'm a little bit harsh when I say brands should communicate beyond these topics, but actually this topic of women independence in China is still very emotional and very much resonating.
Yeah. So you talk about might have been a recent blog post recently that the latest economic niche opening in China is the boom of the lonely economy, and young people in big cities, seeking emotional outlets by embracing loneliness and consuming loneliness. And brands are starting to cater to these consumers. Can you talk about this modern phenomenon and how brands are targeting single women in China?
Yeah, sure. I think it's a very interesting phenomenon because it's the ending, the achievement of the evolution towards women emancipation. If you think about what marriage represents in Chinese culture, it's at it's the core, the cardinal Confucian value. It's the basis of a society of harmony. It's the basis of virtue. So breaking that holy ancestral institution of marriage, because now in China you have an explosion of divorces, which is very new. Mm-hmm. So it's been going on for 10 years. And until very recently, being single was extremely stigmatized. And we talked a lot about, I guess you remember, the leftover women, these women who are over 30 remaining single because they are too smart and too wealthy and they cannot find a matching husband. So it was very negative. And now the new trend is a sort of positivization of singlehood, a celebration of a solo culture, solo lifestyle for women. Because for men, I have to say, if you're men and single, you're still associated to the nerd or the loser. And so we have this celebration of feminine singlehood because it embodies, it's a form of expression of individual freedom, which is the core topic in China. So you see that the consequence of that is at economic level, you see a boom of all individual services, equipment, like, I don't know, a mini fridge, a mini karaoke booth, things like that. Boom of pet culture as well. And in advertisements, you see a lot of Chinese brands staging this hedonist singlehood, the pleasure, the solipsist pleasure to enjoy a drink by yourself, to choose what you're going to eat for dinner, etc. So it's very interesting, and I think that luxury brands don't really capitalize on that trend.
What do you think?
I think they should. But I think in general they should be more observant of micro trends like this in China. And to resonate at a more emotional level.
So let's talk about the new types of Chinese femininities that you're seeing. Could you describe each type and provide examples of where you're seeing it in the culture and in marketing campaigns?
Sure. So we need to you have a lot of representations of femininity. I think what's interesting is to look at first a very interesting trend is the overrepresentation of female success in the media. And there I would identify three types of three concepts of success for women, which are rising. One is the talented woman. So generally an actress, but an actress that has really good acting talents. Now it's more and more difficult. And when you're a luxury brand, it's very important when you select your brand ambassador, not only to choose a famous actress, but also to make sure that in terms of reputation, she has talent, because this determines her aura. Mm-hmm. So the talented woman, she can also be an intellectual. The second type is the top manager. So this is also a rising representation. So the woman climbing up the social ladder, the woman in control, and also the figure of the entrepreneur is rising in the media. Mm-hmm. And the third category are athletes, female athletes. It's a rising trend, notably because of the rise of national pride in China. So this has become they have become super aspirational, and they become role models in China.
I'm sorry, if I'm not correct, I think the most female billionaires are in China.
Oh yeah, I know this is a specificity of China, where you have half of the self-made women billionaires are in China. You also have in China a specificity is that you have 15% of female CEOs. Compared with the US, it's only 5%.
Yeah, wow.
So, but this is the heritage of the Maoists, of the Cultural Revolution. The fact that Mao installed very early equality between men and women, and the vast educational movement following. And also, I think it's a heritage of the single child policy, because girls were invested as much as boys. So this is a specificity of China if you compare to other Asian countries like Japan or Korea, for instance. So it's a paradox. But China is always full of paradoxes.
Right. So you had this one type of femininity that you were describing.
Yeah, and if you look at more interesting, so this is in the media, but if you look more carefully at representations of women in fiction, you have also interesting persona. So you find again this alpha career woman, super independent, ambitious, a bit cold, giving priority to her career, alcoholic. And it's funny because if you look at US TV series or French TV series, it's more the modern woman is more about, okay, I want a work-life balance. I'm going to quit my job in the corporate world and build my startup, and it's going to be eco-friendly. And in China, it's not at all. It's really about career women who want to get in the system, to want to succeed in the system. So it's interesting. And other micro trends that I find funny is the what we call the big sister trend.
Big sister.
Yeah, so it's but it's the equivalent of the cougar actually in China. So you have these couples on TV series, couples. It's a leitmotiv. It's really very frequent. A total reversal of gender roles. So you have the woman who's older, but of course always beautiful. Super successful, and she's in a couple with a younger prepubescent young man, and it's the woman who dominates the relationship, and it's the man who's totally emotional and admires the woman and is so sensitive, and it can be, for instance, a manager and her intern. So it's really really interesting to observe this kind of
now this is a TV show.
Yeah, it's not one; it's a whole trend. So I could mention the
so has that of them. So has that trend moved over to marketing campaigns yet?
No, absolutely not. So I don't know. There are probably some potential for certain brands to resonate somehow with this kind of new modern modern couples. But I think to my knowledge, it's rather untapped at this stage.
And you talked about in the different types of Chinese femininities, you talk about empowered femininity and gender neutral femininity and unconventional femininities. Can you talk a little bit about those?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the idea of gender is definitely the core topic right now in China, because it crystallizes the idea of, as I said before, breaking the norm and accessing individual freedom. So in a country where you have so much censorship, I mean, everything, you have zero liberty in China. You cannot talk about anything. So when you want to talk about freedom and express freedom, what is left? Gender. Right. So it's a huge topic. It's been years already that the gender neutral trend is on in China, but now it's skyrocketing. And a lot of luxury brands are embracing that trend as well, because they know what it represents. It's not about just I'm trendy because I represent a tomboy, celebrity. No, it's much deeper than that, because these women embody the audacity to be yourself. They embody they embody these independent women and who don't care about other people's look. In a country where, beauty, when you're a woman in China, you need to stay young forever. You need to be beautiful in a certain way. I mean, there are so many constraints to women's femininity that these gender neutral, so they are usually K-pop singers or hip-hop singers, embody something really, really aspirational in China.
And what about the unconventional femininities?
I would say unconventional femininities, you mean the representation of more inclusive beauty?
Yeah, body inclusive and body positivity.
Yeah.
Are we starting to see that?
It's the beginning of it. So definitely China is lagging behind in terms of representation of inclusivity, because for the reasons I just mentioned before, because such a long heritage of, like, for instance, being fat in China, it's not that it's ugly. It's just anti-moral. It's not moral because it's about self-neglect. And according to Confucian values, you need to self-improve. You need to, so it's at the core of Chinese values. Something, it's not superficial. So it's very difficult to go against that. And I would say some Chinese brands are more advanced. So I have in mind an ad campaign from an underwear Chinese brand called Neiwei. And for the first time, they represented a palette of women and they all had a flaw. So usually in China, when you represent flaws, it's like, oh, she has a mole. Oh, wow. No, this time it was like an overweight woman, a woman with scars, an older woman, which is also, I mean, age in China, it's something that is, absolutely not represented. When you see women over 40 in China, they always look like they are 25. So there's something that you don't totally invisible.
What was the response to the campaign?
Very good. Very good. And they keep going. Now recently they also showed a same-sex couple. So I feel like Chinese brands, for some of them, are more progressive. It's like when we think of Alibaba gay ad campaign for Chinese New Year last year. It's crazy to think that was possible. But the problem is that when Western brands try to do the same and to represent non-standard beauty, they get backlashed, like what we saw with Zara, the woman with freckles.
Yeah. So in your opinion, do you think brands should be more courageous in embracing female empowerment in their campaigns? Because I know these brands are and we talked about this before, the brands are very sensitive about having anything to do with social movements in China. So do you think that they should be more courageous?
It depends on what you mean by courageous, because I think, as I said before, there's such a strong censorship on feminism that, and in China, there's always the problem is the gray zone. You never know, because, for instance, you cannot represent men with earrings in China in movies. It's forbidden. You cannot represent or suggest homosexuality, but then you had this this Alibaba campaign. Right. So you never know what will be censored or what will not. But But it's a dangerous game, I would say. And it's funny if you look at, for instance, brands communication during Women's Day, and you have the e-commerce festival, which is Queen's Day on that same day.
Right.
You see that Western brands are not very vocal during that day because they're scared, because they know that it's taboo. So it's always about very superficial messages. Treat yourself. Take care of yourself. You deserve it. And then it's these are
Right.
indirect messages to buy beauty products and stuff.
And I think, was it a year or two ago? I think Chanel had a controversial slogan, was that they, for International Women's Day, which essentially translated into, quote, a woman who does not wear perfume has no future.
Yeah.
I think that was, I don't know how long ago that was, but I know that caused
That
a lot
was
of
last
controversy
year.
in China. That was last year.
Yeah. And they received a big backlash, of course. So you see, it's a tricky game, but brands are walking on eggs. So they prefer to stick to, in general, mainstream messages. But I think at some point they will need to. We need the V2.0.2 version of these empowering messages, because it has become a bit overused. They have become overused.
So how do you speak to clients about that, who are nervous about saying the wrong thing? What do you tell them?
It's very individual cases, because we need to take into account, first of all, the identity and the values of the brand. What does this particular brand stand for? What kind of femininity this brand embodies? Because it's about legitimacy. To what extent is your brand legitimate to carry a message of that message of empowerment for Chinese women? You see, so you need to do kind of exegesis or psychoanalysis of your own, of who you are, who am I, what do I embody, and how to translate these values in China. And you need to translate them. I give you an example. Fenty, if you take the Rihanna's brand Fenty, so she created that brand. So her core value is to say, okay, I address women of all colors, all cultures, all personalities, and indirectly it's about it's to fight against racial discriminations. But in China, that message was inaudible. Why? Because China is a monoracial country. You have 92% of Han people, which means they are not confronted to racial diversity in China. Mm-hmm. So it makes no sense. So what Fenty did is to choose a Chinese ambassador called Wang Ju. And this person is very interesting, because this person, she's what we call the unconventional beauty. She has tan skin. I think she's the only celebrity in China with tan skin. And that symbolizes, so she symbolizes inclusivity. She symbolizes breaking beauty standards, because this is what she stands for in China. I'm who I am. I'm like I am. I have my imperfections. This is also a little bit athletics, which is not in China. In China, you need to be skinny. So she embodies all that, and this is how Fenty translated it, a core value in China. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. So overall, do you think most luxury brands are doing a good job of challenging the ingrained stereotypes and expectations of Chinese women?
I think.
And who's getting it right? Who do you think is doing it right?
Yeah, I think it depends. It depends on the industry. And I think that the beauty industry is by far the more advanced in deconstructing stereotypes and talking about female empowerment. I think the best, so you're asking me for best examples. I think the best example remains SK2. So you remember they had this iconic campaign back in 2017 about the leftover women. Mm-hmm. With this iconic campaign on the marriage market. And I think they set the trend. They set a trend after that. Many brands followed, but they were really were pioneer about that. And it's the first brand which carried a societal message instead of just focusing on beauty. And with a very realistic approach, like some of their ad campaigns look more like documentaries mm-hmm. than movies, and which is why they really managed to raise emotion and to address real topics. So they really, disrupted the advertisement in that regard.
Let's talk about the KOLs. KOLs have a big influence in China. How vocal are they when it comes to, body positivity and women's empowerment?
Like KOL, I think, are not super vocal on this topic because again, it's a subtle game and because of the censorship. But what I observe is that you have a lot of celebrity influencers, so singers, actresses, which do carry these and represent. It's not that they talk much about it, but they represent by who they are, empowering messages towards women. So if you take Wang Ju, the stand celebrity singer I was mentioning, this is what she stands for. Her message is be authentic, embrace your imperfections. Or you have another one, but you know Liu Wen, who's the most famous, most prestigious supermodel in China. And at the time, so it was, I don't know, almost 10 years ago, but she didn't conform to beauty standard because she didn't have the double eyelid, which was what was the ultimate beauty criteria at the time. And this is what she stands for still today. So it's about, okay, my differences makes me unique, makes me strong, makes me powerful. And these women are role model and we invite women to be themselves. So you can think that it's cheesy. These messages are cheesy, but I can assure you that it's very emotional and very aspirational for the young generation.
Yeah. So what do you think marketers can do to resonate with this new generation of Chinese women?
Well, as I said, I think they need to pay more attention to micro trends and to maybe watch more TV series and be more attentive to what raises emotion among the young generation. And also have a look at Chinese brands communication because they can be more daring in their approach.
Yeah. You know, following a wave of U.S. companies like Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben's and Mrs. Butterworth's being criticized for racist imagery and branding, many companies started removing words like fair and fairness and white and whitening and light and lightening from all of its brands and products. L'Oreal said it would remove words like whitening from its skincare products. And the decision created widespread negative sentiment across China. I know you were kind of critical of that move too.
Yeah, again, because the topic of racism or diversity cannot be addressed the same way in the US and in China, for the reason I mentioned before, which is that the US are a multiracial country with a history of slavery, a lot of Black people. In China, you don't have Black people. The only Black people in China are expats, people doing business. And it's a monoracial country. And if you look at how the campaigns you mentioned were perceived in China, the suppression of the fair and the lovely skin by L'Oreal, etc., it was not that well perceived in China because they felt that they were considered as racist. And they said, but for us, whiteness, it has been a beauty criteria since the Han Dynasty. It's an ancestral Chinese beauty standard. Aren't we allowed to find it beautiful? When Western women are allowed to find tan skin beautiful. So you see, you need to change perspective here.
Chinese New Year holiday starting this week, it seems, many luxury brands are using this opportunity to try and offset the revenue losses here in the US and in Europe. China has been largely successful in containing the virus, which helped the economy bounce back and luxury consumption started gaining steam again. But recently, we're starting to see the country experience some small coronavirus flare-ups here and there and new lockdown measures in place. So I don't know if you've been following any of the marketing or advertising around this holiday. How have the luxury brands approached their campaign messages?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we started observing because the brands start to communicate very early on Chinese New Year because, as you know, it's it's the number one, most important, most emotional celebration in China. And it's a very interesting time for us because it's to observe every brand for Chinese New Year has no choice but to localize their communication because it's a Chinese holiday. It's not like Christmas or Valentine's Day. So it's an excellent barometer to measure brands' level of understanding of China. It's the trial by fire. So every year you have backlashes. It's, it's not always, sometimes it can be a brand can do great one year, the next year do terrible mistakes. So it's very funny to observe all that. And this year, what I've observed since now, it's the year of the ox. So a lot of very literal, a lot of capsule collections with very literal use representations of the ox that you can find on luxury watches, handbags. You have handbags with the horns and stuff like that. And this is a major issue during Chinese New Year because I feel like you have a lot of gimmicks. So we really encourage brands to use more humor, more creativity, and to remember that it's to get back to the roots of Chinese New Year, which is very emotional. So I don't know, but originally, I don't know if you know, it's an agricultural holiday festival, and it's about spring. It's about the renewal of seasons. So by extension, it's about the generation. So it's all about family reconnection, and this topic is hyper emotional in China in a context when you have a generational gap, you have the growing distance between rural, urban China, parents, children, modernity, tradition, etc. And not enough brands really resonate with that topic. Whereas we see a lot of mass market or Chinese brands really embracing that topic and making people cry. So I think it's a shame.
So my final question, which I ask all my guests, is the luxury item question. And if you were stranded on a deserted island and you could have only one luxury item with you, and that luxury item can't be any form of air transportation or anything that requires mobile service, what would that one luxury item be that you would have with you on that deserted island?
And without hesitation, I would say a bottle of champagne.
Well, you're going to have to keep it cold.
That's the challenge.
You're going to have to sip it for a very, very long time. Just little drops to last you the long it takes. But I like that answer. Laurence Lim Dally, founder and managing director at Cherry Blossoms Intercultural Branding. Thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
Thank you very much.
That's it for this episode of the Luxury Item Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you found this useful and entertaining, I would be really grateful if you can share it with a friend or colleague. I would love it if you subscribe so you never miss an episode. And while you're there, be sure to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. It really helps other listeners find us. The Luxury Item Podcast is a production of Silvertone Consulting. I'm your host, Scott Kerr. Until next time.